The Glacier River rose without warning, but one German shepherd knew it was not nature. A former Navi SEAL followed his dog to the old bridge, expecting mud and broken ice. Instead, they found blood, a destroyed water gauge, and a clue leading straight to the dam. The town called a grieving mother crazy, but her dead son had left behind the truth. A quiet cafe owner carried a war secret that connected her to the soldier and his dog. When the river began roaring again, the dog became the warning no one could ignore. Tell us where you are watching from, and please like and subscribe to support more emotional stories. Cormac Wilder returned to Brightwater Crossing on a morning so bright it almost looked innocent. The small town sat in northern Montana, near the pale edge of glacier country, where pine forests climbed the hills and snow still lingered in the shadows, even when spring had already begun whispering through the valley. Far beyond the rooftops, the mountains lifted their white shoulders into a clean blue sky. Below them, the Frostvein River ran through the town like a ribbon of cold silver, beautiful enough to make strangers stop and take photographs, dangerous enough to make old locals lower their voices when speaking its name. To tourists, Frostvein was a wonder. To those who had lived beside it long enough, it was a thing that fed the land, carved the valley, and sometimes took what no one was ready to lose. Cormac had not come back to be saved by scenery. He was 45 years old, a former Navy SEAL, 6 feet tall with the kind of compact strength built from hardship rather than vanity. His body was lean and functional, not sculpted for display, but shaped by years of moving through places where weakness could cost lives. His face was clean-shaven, the square jaw and defined cheekbones giving him a severe look even when he was quiet. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, though it had grown slightly longer than regulation. His light skin had been weathered by northern cold and older suns from harsher countries. His eyes were gray-blue, watchful and distant, as if part of him still listened for sounds no one else could hear. He wore what he always wore now, an old olive-gray tactical combat shirt, softened by years of use, lightly frayed at the cuffs and shoulders, faded by weather and too many washings. His earth-brown and moss-green combat pants were worn at the knees, the cargo pockets sagging slightly from long habit. Old military work boots carried him over the wet roadside gravel, and an old military watch clung to his wrist, like the last surviving piece of a life he had not fully left behind. His left leg moved with a faint stiffness. Nerve damage from an injury overseas still sent pain through his hip and thigh when the weather changed, or when memory found a way to press on old wounds. Some mornings he used a cane. Some mornings pride made him leave it behind. This morning, pride had won, though not comfortably. Beside him walked Teller. The German shepherd was 4 or 5 years old, yellow-black in coat, athletic and hard-muscled, in the clean, working-line way of military dogs. His amber-brown eyes missed little. His upright ears shifted constantly, catching wind, water, tires on pavement, the hush of pine needles. A worn brown leather collar sat around his strong neck. Teller had survived deserts, aircraft noise, gunfire, and the long silences of a man who often forgot how to speak gently to himself. He did not need Cormac to explain pain. He simply stayed close. The road beside Frostvein curved toward the old bridge. Meltwater slid in narrow threads along the roadside. The morning smelled of wet bark, stone, and river ice. Sunlight scattered across the water in broken pieces, turning thin plates of lingering ice into bright shards. Cormac tried to let the peace enter him. He tried to breathe the way the therapist and Helena had taught him. 4 counts in, hold. 6 counts out. Simple things for complicated men. But the river did not sound simple. Beneath its glittering surface, Frostvine carried a low, restless mutter. It pressed against stones. It whispered under ice. It sounded to Cormac too much like water under a temporary bridge in Syria, rushing black beneath boots, swallowing commands before men could finish shouting them. His left leg tightened. Teller noticed. The dog looked up once, not whining, not begging for attention, just looking. That was Teller's way. A glance like a hand on the shoulder. "I'm fine," Cormac muttered. Teller's ears flicked. Cormac almost smiled. "Don't start." The sky changed before the smile could reach him. Clouds rolled over the high ridge with unnatural speed, dragging shadow across the valley. The blue vanished. A cold rain began suddenly, sharp and hard, striking the road, the river, the shoulders of Cormac's old combat shirt. In less than a minute, Frostvine changed color. The silver turned to dull steel, clear water clouded with silt. The quiet ribbon became a hard-moving current that shoved broken twigs and small slabs of ice against the rocks. Cormac stopped. Every nerve in his body seemed to remember before his mind allowed it. Teller froze beside him. The dog's head had turned toward the old bridge pier downstream. His ears lifted. His tail went still. He was no longer walking with a wounded man on a peaceful morning. He was working. "Teller," Cormac said. The dog did not move. Cormac followed his gaze. Near the base of the bridge, half buried beneath mud and river stones, a bent sheet of metal trembled in the rising water. It looked like scrap at first. This town had plenty of forgotten things rusting along its edges. But Teller lowered his body, then bolted down the bank. "Teller, wait!" The dog ignored him. Cormac cursed under his breath and followed, each step down the slick gravel sending a hot knife of pain through his hip. Rain slid down his face. The river struck the stones harder now, louder, like it had found anger in the mountains and carried it down to town. Teller reached the mud below the bridge pier and began digging. Not randomly, not playfully. He dug with fierce, focused urgency, claws tearing into soaked earth beside the bent metal panel. Cormac reached him, breathing hard, and grabbed the dog's collar. "Easy, easy." Teller stopped digging only long enough to clamp his teeth around something buried beneath the mud. He pulled backward, paws braced, shoulders straining. A strip of orange oilcloth tore free. Cormac took it from him. The fabric was stiff with cold mud. One end bore a dark brown stain that rain did not wash away easily. Blood, old but not ancient. Beneath it clung another smell, one Cormac knew too well from convoy yards and damaged engines. Hydraulic oil. His eyes shifted to the bent metal panel. Behind it stood a damaged river gauge, half hidden, its casing cracked open. Someone had smashed the faceplate and pulled out the inner recorder. A gust of rain swept beneath the bridge. For one heartbeat, the town disappeared. Cormac heard rotor blades, men shouting, water striking metal, a voice calling for pressure, pressure, keep pressure on it. He saw a gloved hand slip from his reach in a dark current overseas. Then Teller barked. One sharp sound. Cormac came back to Montana. The German shepherd was not looking at the broken gauge anymore. He was staring downstream, at the old pedestrian bridge, where a woman stood alone in the rain. She was small, thin, and elderly, wrapped in a taupe-brown coat that hung heavily once wet. A cream scarf was tied around her neck, and silver-white hair had been gathered into a low bun, that the rain was slowly loosening. She held a bundle of flowers in one hand, now soaked and bent. Her face was lined and pale, not weak, but worn by a grief that had lived with her long enough to become part of her posture. Cormac recognized her from town records and old memory. June Marlowe. She owned the narrow riverside inn with the blue shutters and the porch that leaned toward the water. Years ago, her grown son had died in a sudden rise of the Frostvein. People in town spoke of it gently, the way people speak when they are grateful the tragedy belongs to someone else. June had crossed onto the lower walkway to place flowers near the bridge pier. Now the water had surged over the path behind her. She was trapped between the railing and the rising river. Cormac's stomach turned cold. "Ma'am," he called, "stay where you are." June turned. Her eyes, pale and tired, found him through the rain. She did not scream. That frightened him more than panic would have. She simply looked down at the river, as if recognizing an old enemy who had come back wearing the same face. Teller launched himself forward. "Teller!" The dog raced along the bank toward the bridge. Cormac followed as fast as his damaged leg allowed. Pain flared white through his hip, but fear moved him better than strength ever could. The river was rising too quickly. Rain on snowpack, mountain runoff, maybe nothing more, maybe everything more. Halfway to the bridge, a door burst open across the road. A woman ran from the riverside cafe carrying a coil of rescue rope and a small medical bag. She moved without hesitation, cutting across rain-slick pavement toward the bridge. She was about 39, around 5'7", with a slim, capable build and a calm, balanced posture that did not match the chaos of the moment. Her chestnut brown hair was tied low at the back of her neck. Her face was oval, thoughtful, and composed, with hazel eyes that seemed to measure danger before emotion had a chance to interfere. She wore a light gray knit sweater beneath a dark blue-gray work jacket, a brown cafe apron tied over dark jeans and waterproof brown leather boots. Cormac had seen calm like that before, not in restaurants, in field hospitals. "Anchor the rope to the signpost," she called, not loudly, but with command. Cormac stared at her for half a second too long. The woman glanced at him. "Can you tie a bowline?" He almost laughed, despite the rain, despite the pain, despite the river. "I can tie a bowline." "Good," she said. "Then move." There it was, the strange mercy of crisis. It did not ask a man whether he was broken. It only asked whether he could still be useful. Cormac took the rope. His hands remembered faster than his heart. Around the signpost, through the loop, tight, secure. Teller had reached the edge of the bridge approach and stood low, barking once at June, then stepping back, guiding her eyes toward the safer side of the railing. The woman from the cafe moved closer to the flooded walkway. "June!" she called. "Look at me!" June's mouth trembled. "Vera?" So this was Vera Linwood. Cormac had heard the name from the grocery clerk that morning. Owner of the Blue Kettle. Quiet woman. Good coffee. Kept to herself. Fed people who pretended they were only coming in for warmth. Vera's face softened, but her voice stayed steady. "You're going to hold the rail with your left hand. When I tell you, step toward Teller, not toward the water." June shook her head once. "It took Daniel here." "I know," Vera said. The words were simple, but something in them carried weight. Not pity, not fear. Recognition. Cormac clipped the rope around his waist and moved down the bank. His left leg screamed. The sound of Frostvine filled his skull. Teller barked again, sharp and low. The dog's body was angled perfectly, placing himself between June and the worst of the current, without stepping into it. Vera noticed. Her eyes locked on Teller. For one small instant, her composed face changed. The color drained from it. Her lips parted as if the dog had walked out of a memory she had buried under years of ordinary mornings. Then the instant vanished. "Now," Vera said. June stepped. Her boot slipped. Cormac lunged forward, caught the back of her coat, and nearly went down with her. The rope snapped tight around his waist. Pain tore through his hip. Rain blinded him. Teller sprang forward and pressed his shoulder against June's legs, not knocking her down, but bracing her just enough for Vera to grab her wrist. "Hold pressure on the rail," Vera instructed. "Don't fight the current. Step sideways." They moved like that, one slow step at a time, June shaking, Cormac gritting his teeth, Vera calm as a bell struck under water, Teller guiding, watching, adjusting. At last, June reached the higher bank. Vera wrapped a gray emergency blanket around the older woman's shoulders and checked her hands for cuts. June clutched the ruined flowers to her chest. Her lined face crumpled, but she did not cry fully. Some grief had no tears left, only breath. Cormac leaned against the signpost, soaked and trembling with pain he refused to name. Teller should have returned to him. He did not. The German shepherd walked toward Vera instead. The rain softened for a moment, as if the sky itself leaned closer. Teller stopped in front of her and sat perfectly straight. His ears stood tall, his amber eyes fixed on her face. It was not the posture of a pet asking for praise. It was the posture of a trained military dog awaiting orders from someone he recognized. Vera went still. Cormac saw her hand tighten around the strap of the medical bag. Beneath the cuff of her jacket, a thin white scar flashed at her wrist before she pulled the sleeve down. "Teller," Cormac said quietly. The dog did not look back. Vera stared at him, her face pale now in a way the cold rain could not explain. Then, so softly that only Cormac heard it, she whispered, "Impossible." The river roared behind them, carrying mud, ice, and secrets down through Brightwater Crossing. And Cormac Wilder, who had come home only to escape the ghosts of war, understood with a chill deeper than the rain that one of those ghosts had just looked back at his dog. The blue kettle seemed too warm for a morning like that. Rain struck the tall front windows in cold silver lines, turning the world outside into a blur of gray river, black pine trunks, and pale mountain mist. The Frostvein River kept roaring beyond the glass, swollen and restless beneath the old bridge. But inside the cafe there was golden light, polished pine walls, copper mugs hanging above the counter, and the smell of coffee, cinnamon, butter, and wood smoke. Cormac Wilder entered last. He paused at the threshold for half a breath, not because he wanted to, but because his left hip had locked with pain after the rescue. The old injury had a cruel sense of timing. It waited until the danger passed, then reminded him that he was not the man he used to be. He hated that. A Navy SEAL was supposed to move before pain became a vote. A man who had survived hostile roads, burning vehicles, and nights where the air itself felt armed should not have to negotiate with a wet floor and a stiff leg. But war had a talent for following a man home and laughing at his pride. Teller stepped in beside him, yellow-black fur darkened by rain, amber-brown eyes alert beneath upright ears. The 4 to 5-year-old German shepherd did not shake water across the floor like an ordinary dog might have done. He stood still, controlled, watching the room first, then the people, then the exits. The old brown leather collar around his neck was soaked, but his posture remained disciplined, patient, almost soldierly. Vera Linwood guided June Marlowe toward the iron stove near the side wall. June was trembling, though she tried to hide it. At 67, she was small and thin, wrapped in a taupe brown coat made heavy by rain. Her cream scarf had slipped loose, and strands of silver-white hair had escaped from the low bun at the back of her neck. Her lined face carried the pale exhaustion of a woman who had been frightened by something she already knew too well. Vera pulled out a chair. "Sit here, June, close to the heat." June obeyed, which told Cormac more than protest would have. Vera moved quickly, but not hurriedly. She was 39, slim and capable, with chestnut brown hair tied low behind her neck and hazel eyes that seemed to measure everything before allowing emotion to enter. Her dark blue-gray work jacket was wet at the shoulders. Beneath it, a pale gray knit sweater showed at the cuffs. A brown café apron was tied over dark jeans, and waterproof brown boots left faint marks on the wooden floor. She looked like a woman who spent her days pouring coffee. She moved like a woman who had once counted heartbeats while the world fell apart around her. Cormac watched as she took June's wrist, checked her pulse, studied her breathing, then touched 2 fingers lightly below the older woman's jaw. "You're cold," Vera said. "Shaken, but not injured." June gave a small, brittle laugh. "At my age, shaken and injured feel like cousins. Then we'll keep both of them from moving in." The joke was small, dry, almost nothing, but June's mouth softened for the first time since the riverbank. Cormac noticed that too. Some people comforted by pretending the danger had not happened. Vera comforted by making the danger manageable. That was rarer. That was training, or grief, or both. Vera crossed behind the counter and opened a drawer beneath the register. Inside were neat rows of gauze, antiseptic wipes, medical tape, compact trauma dressings, and a small flashlight. Not the cheap emergency kit of a roadside cafe. Something better. Something maintained by someone who expected accidents to become serious before help arrived. Cormac leaned one shoulder against the counter to take weight off his leg. "Prepared place," he said. Vera did not look up. "Riverside cafes should be. Most keep bandages. You keep trauma dressings." She closed the drawer slowly. "Most people underestimate rivers." It was a clean answer. Too clean. June wrapped both hands around the mug of tea Vera placed in front of her. Steam curled up toward her tired face. "Daniel used to say the Frostvein punished people who thought they understood it." Cormac turned toward her. "Daniel?" he asked. "My son." June looked toward the window where the river blurred behind rain. 41 when he died. Old enough to have gray in his beard. Old enough to tell me not to climb ladders. Still my boy. Her voice did not break. That made the grief heavier. Vera stood behind the counter, one hand resting near the drawer she had just closed. Her expression changed at Daniel's name, but only slightly. Cormac saw it anyway. He had spent too many years reading faces before doors opened and after gunfire stopped. June went on. "It was 3 years ago. Clear morning. No storm. No warning siren. Daniel went down near the lower crossing to check a loose sign after runoff had shifted the posts. He knew that river better than most men know their own kitchens. Her thumb rubbed the side of the mug. Then the water came up fast, too fast. By the time anyone reached him, Frostvein had already taken him. Cormac said nothing. There were moments when silence was the only respectful thing a man could offer. They called it glacier melt, June said. A sudden surge. Natural. Unfortunate. Her pale eyes lifted to his. That was their word. Unfortunate. Vera's jaw tightened. Cormac thought of the broken gauge beneath the bridge, the orange oilcloth, the brown stain that rain could not wash away, the smell of hydraulic oil clinging to river mud. "Did you believe them?" he asked. June smiled without warmth. "I'm old, Mr. Wilder. Not stupid." Before Cormac could respond, Teller moved. The German shepherd left his side and crossed the cafe with his nose low to the floorboards. He did not go toward the stove, the bread cooling near the kitchen, or the corner where June sat with shaking hands. He went straight to the dark green canvas medical bag Vera had dropped beside a chair when she rushed back inside. Vera saw him and stopped moving. It was not fear exactly, not the fear of being bitten. It was recognition of a door opening before she had agreed to touch the handle. Teller lowered his nose to the zipper of the bag and inhaled deeply. Then the dog made a sound so low Cormac almost thought the storm had made it. A faint, aching whine. Cormac's chest tightened. Teller did not whine for food. He did not whine for comfort. In all their years together, that sound had belonged only to memory, the kind that came with smoke, blood, heat, and men calling names into dust. Vera took one step closer. Teller placed one paw gently on the strap of the bag, not guarding it, holding it. June leaned forward from the stove. "Vera?" Vera did not answer. She crouched slowly and reached for the bag. When her sleeve shifted, Cormac saw the inside of her wrist. A narrow white scar ran across the pale skin, clean and old, the kind of mark left by something cinched too hard in an emergency. A tourniquet, or restraint, or both. Vera noticed his gaze and pulled the sleeve down. "He has a strong nose," she said. Cormac looked at Teller. He remembers what matters. For a moment, the cafe seemed to forget the sound of rain. Teller lifted his eyes to Vera's face. His ears stood upright, his body still, his expression almost solemn. It was not the stare of an animal seeking affection. It was the stare of a working dog standing at the edge of something familiar and painful. Vera picked up the bag and placed it behind the counter. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were not. Cormac let the silence breathe. Pressing too hard made people close faster. He had learned that in interrogation rooms and hospital beds alike. His gaze moved instead to the framed photographs on the cafe wall. Most showed Brightwater Crossing in softer seasons, fishermen holding trout, trucks buried in snow, the old ferry landing before it collapsed, the Frostvein under summer light. One picture was newer. In it, a tall man in a dark charcoal coat stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony beside the upper river. He was about 54, with silver-brown hair combed neatly back, a long, controlled face and a polished smile that seemed practiced in mirrors. Black gloves covered his hands. Behind him, a banner read, "Frostvein Renewal Project." "Who's that?" Cormac asked. June answered before Vera could. "Holden Greaves, the man who bought the river and convinced half this town he was saving it." Vera gave June a cautious look. "He bought rights to the old hydro structure, not the river. June snorted softly. Rich men always start by buying the words. Cormac studied the photograph. Holden Greaves looked like a man comfortable at the center of a frame. The kind who shook hands in public and made threats through paperwork. The kind of man who could donate rescue equipment with one hand and decide who needed rescuing with the other. He popular? Cormac asked. Useful, Vera said. That wasn't my question. No, she replied. But it's the answer that matters here. June set her mug down. He paid for the new road signs, the town festival, half the sheriff's equipment, and the rescue boat they named after his company. People don't like suspecting a man who pays their bills. Cormac looked back toward the window. The frostvine had swollen higher against the bank. Then Teller moved again. This time he did not return to the medical bag. He passed the counter, nose lifting as if following a faint thread through the warm cafe air. He stopped beside a blue-gray coat, hanging from a hook near the kitchen door. Vera turned sharply. Teller, Cormac warned. The dog touched the coat pocket with his nose. Vera stepped forward. Leave it. But the pocket had already shifted. A small tin box fell from the coat and struck the wooden floor with a bright metallic sound. Everything in Vera's face changed. Cormac bent before he thought better of it and picked up the box. It was dented, old, the kind of container that had survived being carried through more than weather. The lid had cracked open. Inside lay a folded strip of dark cloth, a tarnished medical pin, and a scratched metal tag. Only one word was visible. Lark. The cafe disappeared. For one breath, Cormac was no longer in Montana. He was under a canvas roof in a desert wind, tasting dust and copper. He heard rotor blades beating the night apart, men shouting, a voice cutting through panic, calm and fierce. Lark, over here! Lark, he's losing pressure. Lark, stay with him. Cormac had not remembered the name in years, but his body remembered it. Teller remembered it. And Vera Linwood looked at the tin box as if it contained a grave she had carried in her pocket. She took it from him carefully, not angrily, not hurriedly, carefully, as though the things inside could still bleed. Where did you hear that name? Cormac asked. Vera closed the lid. June watched her with new worry, but said nothing. Vera turned toward the rain-streaked windows. Outside, the frostvine rushed past the cafe, gray and swollen, carrying broken ice downstream like pieces of a shattered mirror. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. Some names are buried because keeping them alive hurts too many people. Teller stood beside her, still and silent. Cormac looked from the dog to the woman and felt the morning settle into a shape he did not yet understand. The river had given him a broken gauge. Teller had given him a memory. Vera had given him a name that should have stayed in the dust of another country. And outside, the frostvine kept rising, as if the water itself had more to say. Morning returned to Brightwater Crossing, wearing a liar's face. The sky was blue again. Sunlight touched the wet pine needles until they shone like green glass. The roofs steamed gently under the pale warmth, and the Frostvein River, which had roared like a beast the day before, now moved with a calmer silver surface beneath the old bridge. To anyone passing through, it might have looked peaceful. Cormac Wilder knew better. He stood beside the river road, with Teller at his left. The old pain in his hip still speaking in dull sparks from yesterday's rescue. His olive-gray tactical shirt was dry now, but the cuffs remained faintly stained from mud. The worn knees of his moss-brown combat pants carried traces of riverbank grit. His square, clean-shaven face was set in the hard stillness of a man who no longer trusted beautiful mornings. The Frostvine looked innocent. So had many dangerous things just before they killed. Teller gave a low breath beside him. The German shepherd's yellow-black coat caught the morning light, and his amber-brown eyes stayed fixed on the bridge pier, where the broken gauge sat half-hidden among stones. His ears were high. His body was calm. But the calm was not rest. It was purpose. Cormac looked down at him. "All right," he said quietly. "Show me." Teller did not need the invitation twice. The dog moved down the slope toward the old water-measuring station near the bridge. It was a narrow steel post fixed to a concrete base, with a cracked casing where the recorder should have been protected. Yesterday, rain and danger had made the discovery feel immediate, almost accidental. Now, in the clear light, the damage looked deliberate. Cormac crouched beside it, his injured legs stiff beneath him. The faceplate had not been torn off by water. The edges showed clean pressure marks. A tool had been used, probably a pry bar or flat-bladed lever. The screws were missing, not sheared. The inner data recorder had been removed. He ran one finger along the casing. No river did that. Behind him, tires hissed on wet pavement. A dark sheriff's SUV pulled onto the gravel shoulder and stopped with a crunch. The woman who stepped out moved like someone who wasted neither patience nor ammunition. Sheriff Marin Quill was 48, about 5'8", with a sturdy, practical build and the kind of posture that made people straighten before they knew why. Her dark brown hair, threaded with a few gray strands, was tied low behind her head. Her face was angular, weathered by wind and long winters, with sharp eyes the color of black coffee left too long on a stove. She wore a tan sheriff's shirt under a dark brown duty jacket, dark tactical pants, black boots, and a duty belt that looked used rather than decorative. Marin Quill did not arrive looking impressed. That was one of the first things Cormac respected about her. "You Cormac Wilder?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." Her gaze moved from his face to the damaged gauge, then to Teller. "Got a call about a broken hydrology station and a former SEAL digging around it with a dog." Cormac stood carefully. His hip disliked the motion, but he refused to show more than a flicker. The dog found the first piece. "I'm guessing that sounded better in your head." A faint smile almost touched his mouth. "Not much." Marin stepped past him and crouched near the gauge. She studied the casing, the concrete base, the muddy bank, and the bent panel where Teller had found the orange cloth the day before. She did not speak for nearly a minute. That was another point in her favor. People who talked too soon usually looked too little. Finally, she said, "Water didn't pull this apart." "No." "You touch anything?" "The cloth. Nothing else." She looked up at him. "You always this cooperative with law enforcement?" "Only when law enforcement asks the right questions." Marin gave him a dry look. "Careful, Wilder. I haven't decided whether you're helpful or a headache." Teller moved before Cormac could answer. The dog lowered his nose to the mud near the gauge and followed an invisible path toward the edge of the road. His paws stopped beside a set of deep tire tracks pressed into the soft ground. The pattern belonged to a heavy truck, not a pickup. The tread angled away from the bridge and toward a gated service road that climbed into the pines. Marin saw it. "Road goes up to Frostvine Dam," she said. "Restricted access." "Who has access?" "County Water Authority, maintenance crews, and Holden Greaves's people." Cormac looked at her. Greaves owns the upper project. He leases operational rights to the old hydro structure. Different words, same headache. Teller sniffed harder at the tire track. Then he did something that made both humans stop. He placed one paw into the deepest tread mark and scraped backward. Wet gravel shifted. Beneath it, sheltered from last night's rain by packed mud, was a tiny dark stain on a pale river stone. Marin's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Cormac crouched again and looked closer. Blood. Not much. A few drops at most. But blood did not belong in a tire rut beside a vandalized water station. Teller looked up at Cormac, then toward the service road. His ears tilted forward, and for one strange moment, the morning felt less like an investigation and more like a warning given by something older than language. Marin pulled out her phone and photographed the stain, the tracks, and the damaged gauge. That, she said, is now my problem. Cormac straightened. Good. It doesn't make it yours. He looked toward the gated road. Someone removed the recorder. Maybe. Someone bled here. Maybe. Teller thinks the trail goes up to the dam. Marin put her phone away. Your dog doesn't get a warrant. Teller gave her a slow, unimpressed look. Despite herself, Marin almost smiled. Don't start with me either. She turned back to Cormac. You need to understand something. This town is small. Greaves is not. He funds half the rescue equipment we use, pays for river access improvements, and has lawyers who enjoy making mud look like fog. Sounds like you've thought about him before. Marin's eyes sharpened. Sounds like you ask questions like a man who hasn't been warned enough. Before Cormac could answer, another vehicle approached. This one was black, clean, and too polished for the damp gravel shoulder. A tall man stepped out wearing a long charcoal wool coat, dark tailored trousers, black leather gloves, and spotless waterproof boots. His silver-brown hair was combed neatly back. His face was long, controlled, and handsome in a cold way, the kind of face that had learned how to smile without surrendering anything. He was 54, though money and discipline had kept the years arranged politely around him. Holden Greaves walked toward them as if he had been expected. Sheriff Quill, he said warmly, I was told there was trouble near one of the old stations. Marin's expression gave him nothing. News travels fast. In a town this size, concern travels faster. Holden's gaze moved to Cormac, then briefly to Teller. And you must be Mr. Wilder. I heard you returned recently. Former military, yes? Cormac did not answer right away. Men like Holden used information like a hand on your shoulder. Friendly only until you tried to step away. Yes, Cormac said. Holden tilted his head with practiced sympathy. I imagine coming home has its difficulties. Brightwater Crossing can be a healing place if one allows it. Cormac felt the old anger stir. Not hot. Worse. Cold. I didn't know the river gauge needed healing too. Marin looked away, hiding nothing and everything. Holden's smile thinned. These older instruments fail constantly. Moisture, ice pressure, vandalism. We've been advocating for modernization, but public infrastructure moves slowly. The recorder is gone, Cormac said. Holden looked at the casing as if seeing it for the first time. That is unfortunate. Cormac remembered June's voice saying that same word. Unfortunate. Teller stepped forward then. The German shepherd did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He simply lowered his head and stared at Holden's boots. Cormac followed the dog's gaze. A faint gray-green smear marked the side of one polished boot, near the heel. It was not ordinary mud. It had a mineral sheen, almost bluish, the kind of silt that collected around old concrete spillways and hydraulic gates. Marin noticed it too. Holden shifted his foot back. Teller gave one quiet growl. The sound was small, but it emptied the air. Holden's eyes hardened for the first time, only for a second. Then the polite mask returned. "Sheriff," he said, "I trust you'll handle this without encouraging civilian interference." "I handle what needs handling," Marin replied. "Of course." He looked at Cormac again. "Mr. Wilder, men who have carried too much sometimes begin seeing battlefields in ordinary places. No shame in resting." Cormac stepped closer, just enough to make the space honest. "And men with too much money sometimes think ordinary places belong to them." Marin's voice cut between them. "That's enough." Holden lifted both gloved hands slightly, still smiling. "No offense intended." "Then don't practice it so well," Marin said. For a heartbeat, Holden's face went still. Then he nodded, returned to his vehicle, and drove toward town. Teller watched until the black vehicle disappeared. Marin exhaled through her nose. "You enjoy making powerful men dislike you?" Cormac looked at the service road. "I don't usually enjoy it. I just seem gifted." Marin did not laugh, but one corner of her mouth moved. Then her expression grew serious again. "There's something else. Elias North, the environmental engineer assigned to review Frostvein flow data, has been missing 6 days." Cormac turned toward her fully. Marin opened a folder from her SUV and showed him a printed photo. Elias North was 42, medium height, lean almost to the point of gauntness, with thoughtful brown eyes behind practical wire-framed glasses. His medium brown hair was slightly messy, as if he ran his hands through it while thinking. He had the soft, tired face of a man who worked outdoors but lived mostly inside numbers. In the photo, he wore an olive waterproof field jacket over a blue-gray flannel shirt, dark cargo pants, and trail boots. A weatherproof satchel crossed his chest. "He came to my office before he disappeared," Marin said. "Said official readings from Frostvein didn't match what he saw on site. He was nervous, not drunk, not unstable. Nervous." "Did he give you proof?" "He said he needed one more sample set. Then his truck turned up near the North Logging Road. Empty." Teller sniffed the air at the mention of the name, though he could not know it. Or maybe, Cormac thought, the dog had already smelled what men were still naming. That evening, Cormac returned to the Blue Kettle. The cafe was closed, though warm light still burned inside. Vera stood behind the counter drying mugs with a white cloth. She did not seem surprised to see him. "You found something," she said. It was not a question. Cormac removed his wet jacket and stayed near the door. Teller walked in beside him, calmer now but still watchful. "Broken recorder, tire tracks, blood. Sheriff says Elias North is missing." Vera's face changed at Elias's name. Not fear this time. Concern. "He came here often," she said. "Quiet man. Always sat near the window with a notebook. He watched the river more than he watched people." "You knew he was worried?" "He said the river was being made to lie." Cormac studied her. "And you believed him?" "I believed he was scared." Silence moved between them. The old name from the night before sat there too, unspoken, heavy as a sealed box. Finally, Cormac said, "You served overseas." Vera looked down at the mug in her hand. "A long time ago." Medical unit? Her fingers tightened around the cloth. Among other things. Teller was injured in Syria, Cormac said. A blast near a field station. Someone kept him alive before he was transferred out. I never saw her face clearly. Vera did not move. Teller crossed the cafe slowly. He stopped beside her, then rested his head against her knee. Not demanding, not pleading. Remembering. Vera's composure cracked. Not loudly, but visibly. Her eyes shone. One hand lowered to the dog's head, hovering there before finally touching the wet fur between his ears. I treated a dog once, she whispered. Yellow and black, young, brave in the foolish way good dogs are brave. Her hand trembled slightly. The report said he didn't survive transport. Cormac looked at Teller. The German shepherd closed his eyes beneath Vera's touch. Vera swallowed. I believed that for years. Cormac did not tell her what that meant yet. Not all truths should be thrown like stones. Some had to be placed gently, one by one, before they could be carried. Vera stepped away and went to a drawer beneath the counter. This time, she opened it by choice. She took out an old folded photograph, worn white at the creases, and laid it on the counter between them. Cormac looked down. The image showed a desert field station under harsh light. A woman stood with her back partly turned, a faded medical patch on her shoulder. Near her, younger and leaner, sat a German shepherd with yellow-black fur and bright amber eyes. Teller, or the ghost of him. Cormac felt the room tighten around his breath. Vera touched the edge of the photo. I thought the past was dead, she said softly. Teller opened his eyes and looked up at her. Outside, beyond the warm cafe glass, the Frostvein moved through the dark with a sound like water carrying secrets away. Sheriff Maren Quill did not become convinced all at once. That was not her way. By morning, the orange oilcloth had been sealed in an evidence bag, the tire tracks had been photographed, and the broken river gauge had been marked off with yellow tape that snapped in the cold wind beside Frostvein River. Maren stood near the bridge with her hands on her duty belt, her sharp eyes moving from the damaged station to the muddy service road climbing toward the pines. A good sheriff did not chase ghosts. A good sheriff also did not ignore blood. Cormac Wilder stood a few feet away, quiet and still in his old olive-gray tactical shirt and worn combat pants, his gray-blue eyes fixed on the river as if it were a living witness refusing to speak plainly. His left hip ached from the day before, but he kept his weight balanced, refusing to lean more than necessary. Teller stayed at his side, yellow-black coat bright against the gray stones, amber eyes following every movement near the water. The German shepherd had not relaxed since they arrived. His ears remained high. His nose kept drifting back toward the rusted plate beneath the old gauge. Maren noticed. That dog doesn't let things go, she said. Cormac looked down at Teller. Neither do rivers. Maren gave him a sideways glance. That's supposed to be poetic or tactical. Depends how much trouble we find. Maren did not smile, but her eyes softened for half a second. Then the sheriff inside her returned. I can open an inquiry, she said. But I can't drag Holden Greaves into an interrogation room because your dog doesn't like his boots. He had spillway mud on them. Maybe. Or maybe he walked near his own project. And the missing recorder? That's evidence of tampering, not evidence of who tampered. Cormac knew she was right. That made it more irritating. Marin folded her arms against the wind. Greaves pays for half the town's good intentions. New rescue boat. Equipment for the volunteer crew. Repairs to the church roof after last winter's storm. He keeps promising jobs once the river tourism expansion starts. People don't turn on a man like that because of suspicion. They might if someone gets killed. Marin's face hardened. Someone already did. June Marlowe arrived soon after, walking down from the road with a stubborn steadiness that made Cormac think of an old pine refusing to fall. The 67-year-old woman wore her thick blue-gray sweater beneath a taupe brown winter coat, cream scarf wrapped high around her neck. Her silver-white hair was pinned low again, though the wind teased strands loose around her lined face. Vera Linwood came with her. The cafe owner looked tired in a way sleep would not fix. Her chestnut-brown hair was tied low, her hazel eyes watchful beneath the hood of her dark blue-gray work jacket. She carried her old green medical bag, though no one had asked her to bring it. Cormac noticed that. Marin noticed too. June looked at the yellow tape around the gauge. "So now it matters," she said. Marin did not defend herself. "Now I have something I can write down." June's mouth trembled, but she nodded. "That's more than I had 3 years ago." Teller suddenly left Cormac's side and went to the base of the measuring station. He lowered his head, sniffed once, then began pawing at the rusted steel plate half buried in mud below the concrete footing. Cormac stepped closer. "He did that yesterday." Marin crouched. Plate could be covering maintenance access. Vera looked toward the river. Water's lower than yesterday, but not by much. Teller scratched harder. His claws struck metal with a sharp scrape. Then he stopped. The dog lifted his head and stared upstream. Cormac felt the change before he understood it. The Frostvein's sound deepened, not louder exactly. Lower, heavier. The kind of sound water made when more water was coming behind it. Marin reached for the small radio clipped to her shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Quill. Any flood warning from County Hydrology?" A burst of static answered. Then a voice replied, "Negative, Sheriff. Official readings show normal range." Cormac stared at the river. Normal. The word looked foolish against the water. Teller barked once, sharp and urgent, then slammed one paw against the rusted plate again. That was the rehook moment, though none of them named it. The official system said the river was safe, but the dog stood over the old gauge as if he had heard a bell no human ear could catch. For one strange breath, even Marin stopped arguing with facts. Everyone looked from Teller to the rising current, and the air seemed to ask a question no report could answer. What if the river was telling the truth, and the numbers were the lie? "Move," Marin said. Cormac dropped to one knee despite the flash of pain in his hip. He wedged his fingers beneath the edge of the rusted plate, while Marin used a tire iron from her SUV. Vera held June back as the first shallow wave broke over the lower stones. The plate lifted with a scream of rust. Beneath it, wedged in a narrow hollow under the footing, lay a waterproof case wrapped in dark military cloth. Teller grabbed the edge of the cloth gently and pulled. Cormac took over, lifting the case free before the next wash of water reached it. Mud streamed from its sides. A dark stain marked one corner of the wrapping. Vera went still when she saw it. "That's blood," she said. Marin looked at her. Vera knelt, touched the cloth near the stain, then brought her fingers close to her nose without quite touching it. Her expression changed. "And hemostatic powder," she added quietly. "Combat grade or backcountry trauma kit. not something you find in a tourist first aid box. Cormac's eyes sharpened. Elias? Maybe, Marin said. But this time her voice was different. They carried the case to the hood of Marin's SUV, away from the rising water. Marin photographed it before opening anything. Then, wearing gloves, she released the latch. Inside were a memory card sealed in plastic, a folded map marked with red lines, several printed photos, and a small field notebook swollen slightly from moisture, but still readable. No one spoke for a moment. Marin unfolded the map. It showed the upper Frostvein structure, including the old dam, the main sluice gate, and a smaller bypass outlet that did not appear on public tourist maps. Red circles marked points along the river where sudden surges would hit hardest. Vera picked up one of the photos. It showed a concrete wall with a long black crack running down its face. Cormac took the field notebook. The handwriting was tight and hurried, written by someone trying to remain scientific while fear pressed on the pen. Dates, times, water levels, weather conditions, manual release estimates, discrepancies between official readings and physical markers downstream. Then June made a sound. Small, broken. Cormac looked up. She was staring at one page in the notebook. There, circled in red, was the date of Daniel Marlowe's death. Beside it were 3 words. Unlogged release likely. June reached for the SUV hood to steady herself. Vera caught her by the elbow. For 3 years, people had treated June's grief like a fog that distorted the world. They had pitied her, humored her, lowered their voices around her. Now the little notebook, wet and cold from beneath the old gauge, had done what no neighbor had done. It had believed her. My boy knew, June whispered. He knew the river didn't rise by itself. Marin removed her hat and held it at her side. I'm sorry, June. June shook her head. Tears filled her eyes, but did not fall. Don't be sorry yet. Be useful. Marin nodded once. I can do that. By late afternoon, Brightwater Crossing had begun to split in 2. The official statement from Sheriff Quill mentioned only an active investigation into river monitoring equipment. But small towns did not need full sentences to build storms. Word spread through grocery aisles, gas pumps, church steps, and cafe tables. Some people grew quiet when Holden Greaves's name came near the conversation. Others defended him before he had even been accused. By sunset, an anonymous post appeared on the town community page. It called Cormac an unstable veteran looking for enemies. It called Vera a woman with a hidden military record and questionable judgment. It called June Marlowe a grieving mother who had never accepted an accident. The post did not mention the case, the blood, the hidden map, or the notebook. It did not need to. Cowardice was often most effective when it dressed itself as concern. That night, Cormac returned to his cabin near the water with Teller at his side and a copy of the memory card hidden behind a loose floorboard beneath the stove. The original was with Marin. The backup was his idea. He did not sleep easily. The river was louder after dark. Near midnight, Teller lifted his head. Cormac opened his eyes in the dark. The German shepherd was standing near the hallway, body low, ears forward, a silent shape carved from shadow. Cormac did not speak. His hand moved beneath the blanket and found the heavy flashlight he kept beside the bed. A floorboard creaked near the back door. Not the old house settling. Wait. Teller moved first. A floorboard creaked near the back door. Not the old house settling. Wait. Teller moved first. He crossed the room without barking, fast and silent until the back door cracked inward. Then the dog exploded forward with a deep warning growl that struck the walls like thunder. A dark figure stumbled backward on the porch. Cormac was up, pain forgotten for 2 seconds, flashlight beam slicing through the rain beyond the open door. The intruder wore a hood, gloves, and dark work pants. Teller lunged to the threshold, but stopped at Cormac's command, shaking with the effort of obedience. The figure fled into the rain. No chase. No heroic tackle. Only the wet slap of boots disappearing into the trees. Cormac stood in the doorway, breathing hard, one hand braced against the frame. His hip burned. His heart pounded with an old, familiar fury. On the porch lay one black work glove. Teller sniffed it once and sneezed softly. Cormac picked it up with a towel. Gray-green mud clung to the leather near the thumb. Beneath it was the faint chemical bite of hydraulic oil. By morning, Marin had the glove in an evidence bag and no patience left for polite caution. "This is now an official criminal investigation," she said. Cormac looked toward the river. "And Holden?" Marin's jaw tightened. "He'll lawyer up before breakfast. But if he knows the memory card isn't enough by itself, he'll try to destroy whatever original source Elias used." Vera stood at the cafe counter later that morning, pale from a sleepless night, working over a damaged phone Marin had taken from the waterproof case. The screen was cracked. The battery barely held. But Vera had steady hands when other people would have rushed. After several attempts, a partial message appeared. It was from Elias North. The timestamp was 6 days old. The words came through in broken lines, but enough survived. "If I don't come back, don't trust the official data. Trust the dog. He'll smell where the water is lying." No one spoke. Teller sat beside Cormac, ears upright, looking not at the phone, but toward the river, as if he had known all along that the Frostvein was not finished speaking. The road to the upper Frostvein did not climb so much as argue with the mountain. It twisted through wet pines and black rock, sometimes narrowing until the tires of Sheriff Marin Quill's SUV ran close to the edge where the river showed itself far below, white and restless between stones. Morning sunlight came and went in brief flashes. 1 minute the sky was clean and blue above Glacier country. The next, a hard curtain of cold rain swept down from the ridgeline, striking the windshield like thrown gravel. Cormac Wilder sat in the passenger seat, one hand braced against the door, his injured left hip burning with every jolt of the road. His old olive-gray tactical shirt was zipped beneath a weathered field jacket, and his worn combat pants were still marked faintly with mud from the bridge. His gray-blue eyes stayed on the river whenever it appeared between the trees. The Frostvine below was not calm anymore. It struck rock after rock, breaking itself into foam, then gathering again with the stubbornness of something that could be wounded but never stopped. Behind him, Teller stood in the rear cargo space, yellow-black coat damp from the morning mist, amber-brown eyes fixed forward between the seats. The German shepherd had refused to lie down. His body swayed with the turns, balanced and controlled, ears high, nose lifting each time the wind forced river scent through the cracked window. Vera Linwood sat beside him in the back, one hand resting near the old green medical bag at her feet. She had tied her chestnut-brown hair low at the nape of her neck, and her dark blue-gray work jacket was zipped tight over a pale gray sweater. Her face looked composed, but not peaceful. There were nights, Cormac knew, that did not end when the sun rose. They only moved behind the eyes. Sheriff Marin drove with both hands on the wheel, Her dark brown hair pulled low, her jaw set. She wore her tan sheriff's shirt under a dark duty jacket, and every glance she gave the road carried the clipped focus of a woman who disliked surprises, but had learned to survive them. "The old ranger station is half a mile from the bypass outlet," Marin said. "It was used for water pressure checks before the private lease." "Before Greaves," Cormac said. Marin's eyes stayed on the road. "Before paperwork made danger look respectable." That was the closest she came to admitting what they all suspected. The ranger station appeared after a final bend, crouched among the pines like an old animal too tired to run. It was a small wooden building with a sagging porch, shuttered windows, and a roof patched in mismatched tin. Beyond it, a narrow path led toward a fenced service road marked with warning signs. Authorized personnel only. Hydroelectric access. Rain began again as they stepped out. Not a storm yet. Just cold, needling rain that slicked the porch boards and darkened the tree trunks. Teller hit the ground first. The dog did not wait for a command. He moved to the porch steps, nose low, then stopped near the left corner of the building. His body stiffened. Cormac followed slowly, each step measured. "What do you have?" Teller sniffed along the baseboard, then pawed once at a dark mark on the wood. Vera knelt beside him. The mark was small, almost invisible beneath dirt and old pine dust. A smear, brown-black, dragged across the grain. "Blood," she said. Marin crouched and photographed it. "Recent?" Vera touched near it with gloved fingers, careful not to disturb the stain. "Not fresh, but not years old." Inside, the ranger station smelled of mildew, rust, and old paper. A broken desk leaned against one wall. A map of the Frostvein watershed hung crookedly beneath cracked glass. Rain tapped on the tin patch above them. Cormac scanned the room, not as a tourist, not as a man seeking clues for drama, but as someone trained to read where bodies had moved under pressure. A chair was overturned. Dust near the back door had been disturbed. On the floor, faint scuffs led from the main room toward a storage closet. Teller moved along those marks, nose nearly touching the boards. Then he stopped beside the closet threshold and gave a low sound from deep in his chest. Vera opened the door. Inside were old survey flags, broken snow poles, a rusted shovel, and a strip of torn olive fabric caught on a nail near the floor. Marin lifted it with tweezers. "That match Elias's jacket?" Cormac asked. Marin took out her phone, compared it to the photo of Elias North, and nodded. "Same color, same waterproof weave." Vera looked at the floor beneath the nail. 3 short, vertical scratches had been carved into the wood. Not random, not decoration. Cormac lowered himself stiffly to one knee. The scratches were shallow, made quickly, perhaps by a key or metal clip. Beside them was a 4th line, started but unfinished. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Vera whispered, "He was counting." The little ranger station seemed to grow colder around them. It was not proof that Elias lived. It was not proof of where he had gone. But it was something worse than a clean crime scene. It was evidence of waiting, of someone injured, hidden, or held long enough to mark time in wood. Teller pressed his nose to the scratches and whined once. The sound moved through Vera like a hand finding an old bruise. Cormac looked at the dog, then at Vera. "He knows the difference between lost and gone." Vera did not answer. Outside, rain thickened, forcing them to stay inside the station. Marin radioed dispatch and requested a wider search of the upper service roads. but reception broke into static between the ridges. She stepped onto the porch to improve signal, leaving Cormac and Vera in the dim room with Teller standing between them. For a while, only the rain spoke. Then Cormac said, "You were Lark." Vera closed her eyes. The name did not strike like surprise anymore. It settled over her like a coat she had refused to wear. "Yes," she said. Cormac watched her carefully. "Syria?" "Among other places." He nodded toward the map on the wall, though his gaze had gone somewhere much farther away. "There was a bridge. Temporary. Bad weather. Bad intelligence. We were moving fast because we had wounded coming out of a village east of the river." Vera's face changed. Not dramatically, but the muscles near her mouth tightened and the color left her skin. Cormac continued, voice low. "Convoy hit pressure plates before we cleared the crossing. First blast took the lead vehicle. Second hit near the bridge support. Water came through the wash like it had been waiting for us." The ranger station faded around him. For a moment he was back in that other rain, where the air smelled of diesel, burnt rubber, copper, and dust turned to mud under men's boots. He remembered lying on broken ground, his left side screaming, his hands numb, his vision narrowing to flashes of light and shadow. "I remember a woman's voice," he said. "She kept telling me to look at her. Not at the water, not at the bodies, at her." Vera's breath hitched. Cormac looked at her wrist, where the pale scar hid beneath her sleeve. "She tied off my leg so hard her own hand bled." Vera turned away, but there was nowhere to go in that small room. "I thought you died," she said. Cormac went still. Vera swallowed and looked back at him. "The report came 2 days later. One of the men I treated coded before evacuation. I never saw the name, only the number. I thought it was you or one of the 2 men they carried out after you. I thought those 10 minutes were just me refusing to accept what had already happened. They weren't." Her eyes shone now, but she did not cry yet. Maybe tears needed permission too. Cormac's voice softened. "I was the man you kept alive." Vera stared at him. "The bird landed because I lasted long enough to give coordinates. 2 others were pulled out because of that. If I had gone quiet before evac, they wouldn't have found them in time." The rain battered the roof. Marin's radio crackled outside, distant and broken. Vera pressed one hand against the old desk as if the floor had shifted beneath her. "No," she whispered. "The report said—" The report was wrong. She laughed once, but it broke before becoming sound. "I left because of that report." Cormac did not move closer. He knew better. Some grief was a wounded animal. Kindness could startle it. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't open the letters. I couldn't. I thought every thank you would belong to someone I failed." Teller stepped toward her. Slowly, as if approaching a person under fire. The German shepherd lifted one paw and placed it gently against her wrist, exactly where the scar lay hidden. This time, Vera did not pull away. Her hand covered his paw. Her composure finally gave way, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet folding of the soul. She lowered herself to the floor beside him, one hand buried in his damp, yellow-black fur, and cried without sound. Cormac sat across from her, back against the wall, his injured legs stretched carefully before him. He did not tell her it was all right. It was not all right. The dead were still dead. The river of that night had still taken what it wanted. But truth, even late, had a strange mercy. It did not raise the dead. It only stopped the living from lying down beside them. Maren entered again just as thunder rolled somewhere above the ridge. Her face was tight. "Radio's acting up," she said, "but I got partial contact from dispatch. Official gauge network still reads normal." Cormac looked toward the window. Outside, the rain had grown heavier. Then the mountain made a sound. It was not thunder. It was deeper, lower. A mechanical groan carried through stone and water, followed by a tremor so faint the old glass in the station window shivered. Teller sprang to his feet. Maren's radio burst with static. A broken voice came through, barely understandable. "Sheriff, auxiliary camera, upper bypass, water release visible, official feed unchanged. Repeat, official feed unchanged." Vera wiped her face quickly and stood. Cormac was already moving, pain flaring as he pushed himself upright. "That was a gate," he said. Maren's jaw hardened. Someone opened the bypass. The frostvine below changed color in front of them. Through the trees, they saw the first surge arrive, gray-brown and violent, charging between the rocks with a force the clear morning had not promised. It dragged foam, branches, and shattered ice. The river rose as if some hidden hand had lifted it from beneath. Holden Greaves was no longer only hiding history. He was acting in the present. Maren grabbed her radio again. "Dispatch, start downstream warning procedures. Get the volunteer rescue crew moving, now." Static answered. Then another sound came from inside the ranger station. Not from Maren's radio, from a cracked handheld unit lying beneath the broken desk. Vera turned toward it. The device was old, mud-streaked, nearly dead. A weak red light blinked near the battery clip. A voice came through, faint as a man speaking from beneath the earth. "Is anyone receiving?" Vera went pale. Cormac looked at her. The voice crackled again. "Please, if anyone hears this..." Teller bolted. He did not run toward the lower road. He did not run back toward town. He shot through the open door into the rain and up the narrow path toward the locked service gate of Frostvine Dam. His body low, ears forward, moving as if the voice had called not to human ears, but straight into the old map of scent and memory inside him. Cormac grabbed the edge of the desk to steady himself. Vera snatched up the handheld radio. The faint voice returned one more time. "Can anyone hear me?" And in the roaring rain, Vera whispered, "Elias." The frostvine did not rise like a wall. It rose like a decision. From the upper bypass, water poured into the river channel in a cold gray surge, gathering branches, broken ice, and mountain silt as it rushed downhill. It did not roar at first. That was the terrifying part. It deepened, thickened, and changed color before sound caught up with it, as if the river had opened one dark eye beneath the rain. Cormac Wilder came out of the ranger station behind Teller, pain cutting through his left hip with every step. The German shepherd was already ahead, yellow-black body low against the rain, old brown leather collar dark with water. Teller did not look back, his amber eyes fixed on the locked service gate leading toward the upper dam's auxiliary control road. He moved like he had been given an order by something older than speech. Vera Linwood followed with Elias North's cracked handheld radio clutched in one hand and her dark green medical bag in the other. Rain flattened loose strands of chestnut hair against her face, but the old fear in her eyes had changed. The woman called Lark had returned, not as a ghost, but as hands ready to work. Sheriff Maren Quill was already shouting into her shoulder radio. "Dispatch, start downstream evacuation. Get the rescue volunteers away from the riverbank. No waiting for official gauge confirmation. Move them now. Static answered her, then a broken voice confirmed. Cormac reached the service gate and found the chain locked. Marin stepped beside him, pulled a bolt cutter from the rear compartment of her SUV, and snapped the chain with 2 hard bites of steel. "Now you have probable cause?" Cormac asked through the rain. Marin shoved the gate open. "Now I have a river trying to kill my town." They went through. The access road narrowed into mud and rock. To their right, the Frostvein dropped through a steep channel, no longer silver, no longer beautiful. It was brown-gray and violent, swelling around boulders and tearing foam from itself. Above them, the old hydro structure crouched against the mountain, a concrete scar built into pine and stone. Far below, Brightwater Crossing had no idea how quickly danger was coming. At the Riverside Green, the annual rescue team fundraiser had begun under a false patch of sunlight. White tents flapped in the shifting wind. Coffee steamed from paper cups. Adult volunteers moved between folding tables stacked with rope, helmets, donated boots, homemade pies, and old photographs of river rescues. There were no children in the crowd. Only grown men and women who had spent too many winters beside the Frostvein to think weather owed them kindness. June Marlowe stood near the main tent, wrapped in her taupe-brown coat and cream scarf, her silver-white hair pinned low. Her face was pale from the morning's discoveries, but grief had sharpened into purpose. When the first warning call came through, people hesitated. Some looked at the river, which still seemed manageable from the green. Some muttered that the official board had not sounded. June climbed onto the low wooden platform near the coffee table. "I lost one man because nobody listened," she called, her voice thin but fierce. "Today, nobody gets to call caution foolish." Her words moved through the adults faster than the siren. An older fisherman with a white beard and weathered red cheeks set down his cup first. A broad-shouldered retired truck driver began folding tables. A middle-aged woman in a yellow rain jacket, sturdy and sharp-eyed, started directing people uphill toward the church steps. The town began to move. Not smoothly, but enough. Back upstream, Teller stopped near the auxiliary control building. It was a squat concrete structure with a steel door, half hidden behind wet brush and service pipes. The official signs on it were faded. The newer padlock was not. Cormac saw tire marks in the mud outside. Fresh. Myron lifted her pistol but kept it low. "Stay behind me." Cormac almost laughed. "I'm not good at that." "Learn." Before either of them could reach the door, Teller veered left toward a smaller maintenance shed connected to the control building by a narrow metal walkway. He shoved his nose under the bottom edge and barked once. Not warning. Location. Vera ran to the door and pulled. Locked. "Elias?" she shouted. For 2 seconds there was nothing but rain and water. Then a sound came from inside. A weak knock. Marin holstered her weapon long enough to strike the latch with the bolt cutter. Cormac braced the door with his shoulder, pain tearing through his hip as the rusted frame gave way. The door opened. Elias North lay on the concrete floor inside, alive but barely. He was 42, lean to the point of gauntness, his medium brown hair matted against his forehead. Wire-framed glasses cracked and crooked on his face. His olive waterproof field jacket was torn at one sleeve, revealing a blood-stiffened blue-gray flannel shirt underneath. His lips were dry. His brown eyes, intelligent but fevered, blinked against the light as though he had been buried somewhere beneath time. Vera dropped beside him. "Elias, can you hear me?" His eyes struggled to focus. "Vera?" "I'm here." Teller stood over him, nose close to the torn sleeve, then looked toward the control building and growled. Elias gripped Vera's wrist with weak fingers. He came back. Greaves. Data drive. Control room. Marin's face hardened. Cormac looked toward the narrow walkway. There, beyond the rain, a figure moved behind the glass of the auxiliary control room. Holden Greaves. His dark charcoal coat was soaked now, the elegance of it ruined by storm and panic. His silver-brown hair had lost its perfect shape, but his face remained controlled in that cold, unnatural way. In one gloved hand, he carried a black hard drive. In the other, he held a ring of access keys. He saw them. For the first time since Cormac had met him, Holden Greaves stopped pretending. The smile vanished. He ran. Marin shouted for him to stop. Holden crossed onto the maintenance bridge, a narrow steel span slick with rain that connected the control building to the upper service path. Below it, the bypass water hammered through a concrete chute before joining the Frostvein. Cormac moved without thinking. Not fast like before. Not like the man he had once been. His bad leg dragged half a beat behind him, and pain burned up through his spine. But he saw the layout faster than Holden did. The bridge had one far exit, a secondary gate beyond it. Marin's remote lock control could seal that gate if she got close enough to the panel. "Cut him off," Cormac said. Marin understood. She sprinted toward the side access panel while Cormac took the central walkway. Vera stayed with Elias, pressing gauze to his torn arm, her voice steady as rainwater ran down her face. "Stay with me. Eyes open. Breathe slow." Elias tried to speak. "The downstream event. Evacuation is moving," Vera said. "Save your strength." But downstream, danger was already touching the edges of the fundraiser. The river rose over the lower gravel path and began eating at the mud beneath the parking area. A volunteer pickup, used to haul sound equipment and propane tanks for the food tent, had backed too close to the soft ground. When the driver tried to move it, the rear wheels sank deep. Inside were two elderly fishermen and the middle-aged woman in the yellow rain jacket, who had gone back to retrieve the vehicle keys and a first aid crate. One door had jammed against a tilted equipment rack. Water slid around the tires, not high yet, but fast and mean. June saw the truck shift. She did not freeze this time. She pointed with one thin hand. "Rope team there. Anchor to the oak, not the tent pole." A retired truck driver and 3 adult volunteers obeyed. The white-bearded fisherman inside the pickup pressed both palms to the window, his face tight but controlled. The woman in yellow kicked at the stuck door, jaw clenched, refusing panic. The Frostvine surged again. Upstream, Holden reached the middle of the maintenance bridge just as the far gate slammed shut. Marin had locked it. He spun back, trapped between her and Cormac. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," Holden shouted over the water. Cormac kept moving toward him. "Looks like evidence destruction. It was controlled release management. You opened a bypass during a public event. The gauges would have corrected." "The gauges were lying." Holden's face twisted. "Do you know what happens if that dam is shut down? Jobs disappear. Contracts collapse. This town dies slowly." Cormac stopped 10 feet away. "No," he said. "You just don't get to call greed a public service anymore." Holden raised the hard drive as if he might throw it into the water. Teller appeared behind Cormac, having left Elias once Vera stabilized him. The dog's wet fur bristled. He did not bark. He watched Holden's hand. That was the re-hook. In the middle of rain, steel, and rushing water, Teller suddenly lowered his body and stared not at Holden's face, but at the hard drive. Then he made one short, sharp sound, the same alert he had once used for explosive scent. Cormac understood at once. The drive was not just a copy. It was the source device. The thing Holden had risked everything to recover. Marin heard the change in Teller's sound, too. "Put it down, Greaves," she said. Holden looked between them and realized the dog had betrayed what his face had hidden. His fingers loosened. The hard drive struck the bridge deck instead of the river. Cormac moved in, kicked it backward with one boot, and Marin closed the distance with handcuffs. Holden Greaves did not fight like a desperate man. He went still like a man already calculating lawyers. Downstream, the pickup rescue succeeded in inches. The adult volunteers used anchored rope to stabilize the vehicle long enough for the trapped passengers to crawl out through the driver's side window one at a time. The woman in the yellow rain jacket came last, carrying the first aid crate against her chest as muddy water swallowed the rear tires. June stood in the rain, shaking, but not from fear alone. This time people had listened. Upstream, just as Marin secured Holden, the bridge groaned. A slab of broken ice, carried by the bypass surge, slammed into one of the lower supports. The maintenance span shuddered. A section of wet metal grating near the side rail snapped downward. Vera was crossing back from the shed after stabilizing Elias. Teller saw the grate fail before she did. He lunged toward her and drove his shoulder against her legs, pushing her back from the collapsing section. Vera stumbled safely onto solid steel. But Teller's paws hit the slick edge. The German Shepherd slid. His claws scraped sparks against metal. "Teller!" Cormac shouted. The dog dropped against the broken side of the bridge, hind legs slipping toward the open gap above the roaring bypass. Cormac threw his cane aside and went down hard on his knees. Pain exploded white through his hip, but he crawled forward, one hand grabbing at the wet deck, the other reaching for the old brown leather collar. Vera seized the rescue rope from Marin's shoulder and looped it around Cormac's waist. Marin anchored behind him. The water below was no longer a river. It was a mouth. Cormac's fingers closed around Teller's collar, just as another broken plate of ice struck the support. The rope snapped tight. Vera screamed his name. Rain swallowed the bridge, the river, the dog, and the man holding on. The rope held. For one terrible second, that was the only miracle the world had left. Rain beat against the broken maintenance bridge. The Frostvein raged below, no longer silver, no longer beautiful, but dark and muscular, hurling ice and foam through the concrete chute beneath the old dam. Cormac Wilder lay flat on the slick steel grating, one arm stretched over the broken edge, fingers locked around Teller's soaked leather collar. The German Shepherd hung half over the gap, yellow-black fur plastered to his body, hind legs scraping for purchase. His amber eyes were wide but not panicked. Even there, above the furious water, Teller trusted him. That trust nearly broke Cormac's heart. Cormac's left hip burned as if the old wound had opened under the skin. His shoulder trembled. His boots slipped against the wet metal. Once he would have hauled the dog up with one brutal pull and cursed afterward. Now his body shook with effort, and the river below seemed to know it. "Hold him!" Vera Linwood shouted. She had the rescue rope wrapped around both hands, rain streaming down her face, chestnut hair flattened against her cheeks. Her dark blue-gray jacket was soaked through, but her hazel eyes had the fierce focus of the woman once called Lark. Beside her, Sheriff Marin Quill braced her boots against the bridge beam, jaw clenched, duty jacket dark with rain. 2 adult rescue volunteers had reached them from the lower road and grabbed the rope behind her. Cormac felt the pull tighten around his waist. "On three!" Marin shouted. "1, 2, pull!" The world became pain, rain, and breath. Cormac dragged backward. Vera pulled. Marin leaned her full weight into the rope. The volunteers heaved, boots sliding, shoulders straining. Teller's front paws struck the edge, claws scraping against steel. Then he came up. All at once, the German shepherd collapsed onto the bridge deck, wet, shaking, alive. Cormac rolled onto his back beside him, gasping. Teller crawled forward and pressed his head against Cormac's chest, then licked his jaw once with solemn disapproval, as if the man had been far too slow. Cormac let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. "Yeah," he whispered, one hand buried in the dog's soaked fur. "I know." No one cheered. Not there. Not above that water. They simply breathed together, because sometimes survival was too sacred for noise. Holden Greaves stood handcuffed near the control building, watched by Marin's deputy and 2 state responders who had arrived through the emergency access road. The rain had ruined his polished dignity. His long charcoal coat clung to him, his silver-brown hair hung wet across his forehead, and the controlled mask on his face had thinned into something smaller and uglier. He no longer looked like the man who had bought admiration with donations and ribbon ceremonies. He looked like a man listening to the river count his sins. Elias North was carried from the maintenance shed on a stretcher shortly afterward. The 42-year-old environmental engineer looked pale and exhausted, wire-framed glasses cracked, brown hair matted, olive field jacket torn at the sleeve. Yet when Vera walked beside him, holding pressure on his bandaged arm, his tired brown eyes remained alert. "He has the drive?" Elias asked weakly. Marin lifted the sealed evidence bag containing the black hard drive. "We have it." Elias closed his eyes. "Good." Downstream, Brightwater Crossing had survived the surge. Mud covered the lower green. The volunteer pickup was ruined, half sunk near the edge where the bank had collapsed. Tents sagged under rain. Coffee cups, rope bags, and folding chairs lay scattered like the remains of a small, harmless celebration interrupted by judgment. But the people were alive. The fishermen, the volunteers, the retired drivers, the cafe workers, the adults who had listened in time, all stood farther uphill near the church steps, wet and shaken but breathing. June Marlowe stood among them, her taupe brown coat dark with rain, cream scarf clutched at her throat. Her thin body trembled, but her eyes were clear. This time, the river had come. This time, people had listened. By evening, the Frostvein had begun to lower, though it did not apologize. Rivers never did. State investigators took control of the dam site. The bypass gate was sealed manually. Warning lights finally flashed on the official board hours after the real danger had passed. An insult too late to matter. Inside the blue kettle, the survivors gathered in a quiet, unlike any the cafe had held before. No music played. No one argued. Wet coats hung from chairbacks. Muddy boots lined the door. Coffee steamed in white mugs, and Vera moved from table to table with bandages, blankets, and the old calm that no longer looked like hiding. It looked like purpose. Marin stood near the counter with a tablet open, reviewing the contents recovered from Holden's hard drive. Her stern face grew darker with each file. Cormac sat near the window, Teller lying at his feet on a folded blanket. The German shepherd had been checked twice by Vera and once by the emergency vet who drove in from the next town. Bruised ribs, strained shoulder, no broken bones. Teller accepted the attention with patient dignity, though his ears flattened every time someone tried to call him lucky. Cormac knew better. Luck was too small a word for loyalty. June sat across from him, both hands wrapped around a mug she had not touched. Her silver-white hair had come loose again, framing her lined face. Vera had set a dry blanket around her shoulders. For the first time since Cormac had met her, June did not look like a woman trying to convince the world of something. She looked like someone waiting for the world to admit what it had done. Marin looked up from the tablet. "There's a folder labeled Marlowe Incident." June went very still. Cormac felt Teller lift his head under the table. Marin hesitated, and in that hesitation the whole cafe seemed to hold its breath. "June, you don't have to hear this now." June's voice came thin but steady. "I have waited 3 years. Don't make me wait kindly." Marin nodded once. The folder contained internal emails, archived gate logs, and a private assessment written 2 weeks after Daniel Marlowe died. The language was clean and bloodless. Risk exposure, unlogged auxiliary release, downstream civilian fatality, public explanation acceptable under natural surge classification. June closed her eyes. Not because she was surprised, because there it was. The monster had finally spoken in its own handwriting. Cormac watched her hand tighten around the mug. Beside her, Vera reached across the table and placed her fingers gently over June's. No speech, no sermon, just contact. June opened her eyes again, and the tears that came were quiet. "My boy was not careless," she whispered. "No," Marin said, "he wasn't." That was the re-hook of the chapter, though it did not point forward to another danger. It turned the whole story inward. For 3 years, June had carried grief and humiliation together, one arm on each shoulder. Now one burden slid away. Not the grief, never the grief, but the lie. And when a lie leaves, even sorrow stands differently. Holden Greaves was transferred before nightfall. He did not rage when they took him through the wet street. He did not plead. He walked between 2 state officers with the stiff silence of a man already building explanations in his head. The townspeople did not shout at him. That would have been easier for him. Instead, they watched in a silence colder than rain. It was the silence given to men who had mistaken trust for property. In the days that followed, the Frostvein Renewal project was suspended. The old dam was locked down. Engineers came from Helena, serious men and women in orange vests who walked the concrete walls and marked every crack Holden had paid people not to discuss. Elias North survived and gave a sworn statement from a hospital bed, his voice weak but precise. The hard drive, the notebook, the hidden map, and the falsified readings became evidence no donation could soften. June received a copy of Elias's notebook from Marin. Cormac was there when she took it to the lower crossing. The rain had stopped by then. The river ran high but clearer, sunlight moving across it in pale strips. June stood where she had once placed flowers in despair. Her small figure seemed fragile against the wide water, but Cormac knew better now. Some people did not become strong because life spared them. They became strong because it failed to finish breaking them. She held the notebook against her chest. "No one can give Daniel back," she said. Cormac stood beside her with Teller at his knee. "No." June looked at the river. But truth came late and still found the road. Teller pressed his shoulder lightly against her leg. June touched the dog's head with a trembling hand. "You stubborn old angel." Cormac almost smiled. He's not an angel. He steals bacon when unsupervised. June gave a wet laugh. It was small, but real. Weeks passed. Spring widened into early summer. The blue kettle changed in ways strangers might not notice. Vera hung the tarnished lark pin in a small frame behind the counter, not where everyone would see it at once, but where she could see it when she reached for coffee cups. She began offering free first aid evenings for fishermen, trail workers, road crews, and rescue volunteers. When someone jokingly called her Doc Lark, she made a face as if she disliked it. But she did not deny it. Cormac did not heal like a man in a story who simply decides to be better and becomes so by sunset. Pain still found him. Nightmares still came. Some mornings the sound of water tightened his chest before his eyes opened. But the river no longer belonged only to fear. It belonged also to the rope that held, to Vera's hands on the line, to Marin's voice cutting through chaos, to June standing before her town and making people listen, to Teller's faith in him when the current wanted one more name. By midsummer, the old bridge was reinforced with new steel and warning markers. A plain sign stood near the bank. It did not flatter the town. It did not mention donors or progress. It read, "Water remembers. People should too." On a bright morning washed clean by mountain wind, Cormac crossed the bridge with Teller at his side. Vera waited at the far end holding 2 coffees, her chestnut hair tied low, sunlight catching the frame of the lark pin on her apron strap. June sat on a bench near the river path, silver-white hair shining beneath the soft blue sky, watching the water with eyes still sad but no longer pleading. Sheriff Marin Quill stood beside the new warning sign, arms crossed, inspecting the bolts as if even healing required proper installation. Cormac stopped at the center of the bridge. Below him, the Frostvein moved cold and strong over stone. Teller lifted his head toward the upper river, ears pricked, listening as if some quiet message still traveled inside the current. Cormac placed one hand on the dog's head. For the first time in a long while, he did not ask the river to be gentle. He only asked himself to keep walking beside the truth. And beneath the northern sun, with the dog at his side and the town breathing behind him, Cormac Wilder took the next step. Chapter 7. Where the river returned the truth. The rope held. For one terrible second, that was the only miracle the world had left. Rain beat against the broken maintenance bridge. The Frostvine raged below, no longer silver, no longer beautiful, but dark and muscular, hurling ice and foam through the concrete chute beneath the old dam. Cormac Wilder lay flat on the slick steel grating, one arm stretched over the broken edge, fingers locked around Teller's soaked leather collar. The German shepherd hung half over the gap, yellow-black fur plastered to his body, hind legs scraping for purchase. His amber eyes were wide but not panicked. Even there, above the furious water, Teller trusted him. That trust nearly broke Cormac's heart. Cormac's left hip burned as if the old wound had opened under the skin. His shoulder trembled. His boots slipped against the wet metal. Once he would have hauled the dog up with one brutal pull and cursed afterward. Now his body shook with effort, and the river below seemed to know it. "Hold him!" Vera Linwood shouted. She had the rescue rope wrapped around both hands, rain streaming down her face, chestnut hair flattened against her cheeks. Her dark blue-gray jacket was soaked through, but her hazel eyes had the fierce focus of the woman once called Lark. Beside her, Sheriff Marin Quill braced her boots against the bridge beam, jaw clenched, duty jacket dark with rain. Two adult rescue volunteers had reached them from the lower road and grabbed the rope behind her. Cormac felt the pull tighten around his waist. "On three!" Marin shouted. "1, 2, pull!" The world became pain, rain, and breath. Cormac dragged backward. Vera pulled. Marin leaned her full weight into the rope. The volunteers heaved, boots sliding, shoulders straining. Teller's front paws struck the edge, claws scraping against steel. Then he came up. All at once, the German shepherd collapsed onto the bridge deck, wet, shaking, alive. Cormac rolled onto his back beside him, gasping. Teller crawled forward and pressed his head against Cormac's chest, then licked his jaw once with solemn disapproval, as if the man had been far too slow. Cormac let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. "Yeah," he whispered, one hand buried in the dog's soaked fur. "I know." No one cheered. Not there. Not above that water. They simply breathed together, because sometimes survival was too sacred for noise. Holden Greaves stood handcuffed near the control building, watched by Marin's deputy and two state responders who had arrived through the emergency access road. The rain had ruined his polished dignity. His long charcoal coat clung to him. His silver-brown hair hung wet across his forehead, and the controlled mask on his face had thinned into something smaller and uglier. He no longer looked like the man who had bought admiration with donations and ribbon ceremonies. He looked like a man listening to the river count his sins. Elias North was carried from the maintenance shed on a stretcher shortly afterward. The 42-year-old environmental engineer looked pale and exhausted. Wire-framed glasses cracked. Brown hair matted. Olive field jacket torn at the sleeve. Yet when Vera walked beside him, holding pressure on his bandaged arm, his tired brown eyes remained alert. "He has the drive?" Elias asked weakly. Marin lifted the sealed evidence bag containing the black hard drive. "We have it." Elias closed his eyes. "Good." Downstream, Brightwater Crossing had survived the surge. Mud covered the lower green. The volunteer pickup was ruined, half sunk near the edge where the bank had collapsed. Tents sagged under rain. Coffee cups, rope bags, and folding chairs lay scattered like the remains of a small, harmless celebration interrupted by judgment. But the people were alive. The fishermen, the volunteers, the retired drivers, the cafe workers, the adults who had listened in time, all stood farther uphill near the church steps, wet and shaken but breathing. June Marlowe stood among them, her taupe-brown coat dark with rain, cream scarf clutched at her throat. Her thin body trembled, but her eyes were clear. This time the river had come. This time people had listened. By evening, the Frostvein had begun to lower, though it did not apologize. Rivers never did. State investigators took control of the dam site. The bypass gate was sealed manually. Warning lights finally flashed on the official board hours after the real danger had passed, an insult too late to matter. Inside the blue kettle, the survivors gathered in a quiet unlike any the cafe had held before. No music played. No one argued. Wet coats hung from chairbacks. Muddy boots lined the door. Coffee steamed in white mugs, and Vera moved from table to table with bandages, blankets, and the old calm that no longer looked like hiding. It looked like purpose. Marin stood near the counter with a tablet open, reviewing the contents recovered from Holden's hard drive. Her stern face grew darker with each file. Cormac sat near the window, Teller lying at his feet on a folded blanket. The German shepherd had been checked twice by Vera and once by the emergency vet who drove in from the next town. Bruised ribs, strained shoulder, no broken bones. Teller accepted the attention with patient dignity, though his ears flattened every time someone tried to call him lucky. Cormac knew better. Luck was too small a word for loyalty. June sat across from him, both hands wrapped around a mug she had not touched. Her silver-white hair had come loose again, framing her lined face. Vera had set a dry blanket around her shoulders. For the first time since Cormac had met her, June did not look like a woman trying to convince the world of something. She looked like someone waiting for the world to admit what it had done. Marin looked up from the tablet. There's a folder labeled Marlowe Incident. June went very still. Cormac felt Teller lift his head under the table. Marin hesitated, and in that hesitation, the whole cafe seemed to hold its breath. June, you don't have to hear this now. June's voice came thin but steady. I have waited 3 years. Don't make me wait kindly. Marin nodded once. The folder contained internal emails, archived gate logs, and a private assessment written 2 weeks after Daniel Marlowe died. The language was clean and bloodless. Risk exposure, unlogged auxiliary release, downstream civilian fatality. Public explanation acceptable under natural surge classification. June closed her eyes. Not because she was surprised, because there it was. The monster had finally spoken in its own handwriting. Cormac watched her hand tighten around the mug. Beside her, Vera reached across the table and placed her fingers gently over June's. No speech, no sermon, just contact. June opened her eyes again, and the tears that came were quiet. My boy was not careless, she whispered. No, Marin said. He wasn't. That was the re-hook of the chapter, though it did not point forward to another danger. It turned the whole story inward. For 3 years, June had carried grief and humiliation together, one on each shoulder. Now one burden slid away. Not the grief, never the grief, but the lie. And when a lie leaves, even sorrow stands differently. Holden Greaves was transferred before nightfall. He did not rage when they took him through the wet street. He did not plead. He walked between 2 state officers with the stiff silence of a man already building explanations in his head. The townspeople did not shout at him. That would have been easier for him. Instead, they watched in a silence colder than rain. It was the silence given to men who had mistaken trust for property. In the days that followed, the Frostvein renewal project was suspended. The old dam was locked down. Engineers came from Helena, serious men and women in orange vests who walked the concrete walls and marked every crack Holden had paid people not to discuss. Elias North survived and gave a sworn statement from a hospital bed, his voice weak but precise. The hard drive, the notebook, the hidden map, and the falsified readings became evidence no donation could soften. June received a copy of Elias's notebook from Marin. Cormac was there when she took it to the lower crossing. The rain had stopped by then. The river ran high but clearer, sunlight moving across it in pale strips. June stood where she had once placed flowers in despair. Her small figure seemed fragile against the wide water. But Cormac knew better now. Some people did not become strong because life spared them. They became strong because it failed to finish breaking them. She held the notebook against her chest. No one can give Daniel back, she said. Cormac stood beside her with Teller at his knee. No. June looked at the river. But truth came late and still found the road. Teller pressed his shoulder lightly against her leg. June touched the dog's head with a trembling hand. You stubborn old angel. Cormac almost smiled. He's not an angel. He steals bacon when unsupervised. June gave a wet laugh. It was small, but real. Weeks passed. Spring widened into early summer. The blue kettle changed in ways strangers might not notice. Vera hung the tarnished lark pin in a small frame behind the counter, not where everyone would see it at once, but where she could see it when she reached for coffee cups. She began offering free first aid evenings for fishermen, trail workers, road crews, and rescue volunteers. When someone jokingly called her Doc Lark, she made a face as if she disliked it, but she did not deny it. Cormac did not heal like a man in a story who simply decides to be better and becomes so by sunset. Pain still found him. Nightmares still came. Some mornings the sound of water tightened his chest before his eyes opened. But the river no longer belonged only to fear. It belonged also to the rope that held, to Vera's hands on the line, to Marin's voice cutting through chaos, to June standing before her town and making people listen, to Teller's faith in him when the current wanted one more name. By midsummer, the old bridge was reinforced with new steel and warning markers. A plain sign stood near the bank. It did not flatter the town. It did not mention donors or progress. It read, "Water remembers. People should too." On a bright morning washed clean by mountain wind, Cormac crossed the bridge with Teller at his side. Vera waited at the far end holding 2 coffees, her chestnut hair tied low, sunlight catching the frame of the lark pin on her apron strap. June sat on a bench near the river path, silver-white hair shining beneath the soft blue sky, watching the water with eyes still sad, but no longer pleading. Sheriff Marin Quill stood beside the new warning sign, arms crossed, inspecting the bolts as if even healing required proper installation. Cormac stopped at the center of the bridge. Below him, the Frostvein moved cold and strong over stone. Teller lifted his head toward the upper river, ears pricked, listening as if some quiet message still traveled inside the current. Cormac placed one hand on the dog's head. For the first time in a long while, he did not ask the river to be gentle. He only asked himself to keep walking beside the truth. And beneath the northern sun, with the dog at his side and the town breathing behind him, Cormac Wilder took the next step.